Hello and welcome to this podcast from the BBC World Service. Please let us know what you think and tell other people about us on social media. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
Fall will be here before you know it, and with it, the start of a new school year. Shop now at Macy's.com/back-to-school.
This is the Witness History podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Kirsty Reid. In 1996, the Taliban took control of Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, for the first time. I've been listening to accounts of those days from two residents of Kabul who were teenagers when Taliban fighters moved into the city in late September that year.
The Afghan capital, Kabul, has fallen to the Taliban Islamic militia after heavy overnight fighting. Hours earlier, government troops had abandoned the city.
The battle for Kabul was short but savage. The Taliban had been repulsed twice before, but this time it was a rout.
The Taliban had defeated the government of what were called the Mujahideen, the Western-backed guerrillas who had driven out occupying Soviet troops a few years earlier. Najib Sharifi was 15 in 1996, and he remembered watching the Mujahideen go.
People could see them packing up their goods and leaving the city. And some of our own neighbors started packing up and leaving. So that was the very first sign for me that Taliban are going to take over Kabul.
In 1996, some Kabul citizens weren't particularly upset to see the back of the Mujahideen. After driving out the Soviets, they'd carried on fighting with each other. Kabul was still an unsafe city. Women particularly barely dared to venture outdoors. A woman whom we called Katera told Witness History that people wanted to believe that the Taliban, with their promises of peace and stability, would at least bring some sort of order.
There was no rule of law. People were fed up with Mujahideen. And when the Taliban came, I'm sure people will not believe it now, but lots of people supported there when they came. They thought yes, these are the guys that they would bring order and security into Afghans. And in the beginning, in the first few months, they did so. They put very harsh punishments. And those harsh punishments were actually necessary at that time because they did enforce a law. It wasn't a pleasant law, but it was necessary at that time. We needed something like that.
And initially, Najib Sharifi felt the same way.
Everybody was quite curious about their nature, about what kind of people they were. We had heard a lot of stories about the Taliban, before they came to Kabul. Actually, most of the stories were positive stories. They were being called doves of peace, security, and disarmament of irresponsible armed groups. And some people would even, liken them to the angels.
By Thursday evening, Taliban soldiers were here at the presidential palace, the seat of government and their main prize. Fighting continued overnight as the last remnants of government resistance crumbled. But now Taliban soldiers patrol the streets of the capital after their 22-month march to power.
But on that first day of Taliban rule, news emerged of the brutal torture and killing of Afghanistan's former communist president, Dr. Najibullah, along with his brother, at the hands of Taliban fighters.
The news spread around the city very rapidly, and it was a tragic news for a lot of people in Kabul, when they heard that Dr. Najib was, killed by the Taliban. That was the very first alarm for the people of Kabul, that Taliban may have a nature very different from what we've been hearing.
Terence White was a foreign journalist in Kabul. He described the gruesome scene when the bodies of the murdered men were put on display.
The corpses were soaked in blood. Najibullah, I remember, had the back of his skull missing. You could tell. We know that he was dragged along the road behind a jeep. Also, the Taliban had stuffed banknotes in their mouths and cigarettes in their fingers. This, of course, is a traditional sign of contempt. When I got to the spot, there were literally thousands of people. And by people, of course, I mean Afghan men. There was a couple of Taliban there. They were actually Pakistanis, judging by the way they spoke English. They were beating the crowd with rubber hoses in order to keep the crowd settled. They were sitting and just watching, mostly in silence. I mean, this was a very dramatic sight.
The Taliban immediately set about imposing their strict interpretation of Islamic law. Television and music were banned. Men were forbidden to cut their beards. Education for girls was outlawed. Najib Sharifi's mother was a teacher. She lost her job and his sister was forced to stay at home. But as Khatera told Alan Johnston for Witness History, women's lives had already been restricted under Mujahideen rule.
For us, for those who were not allowed to go to school before, like during Mujahideen, didn't make any difference. We were still locked in the houses. We were still not able to dress the way I wanted to dress. We were still not allowed to go outside the house. We were still not allowed to go and grab, drinks outside, go for ice cream.
And what about your education? You were 15 and bright and clever, and you must have worried that you weren't being educated at all.
Yes, we didn't go to school, but we did study at home. Both my parents are educated and we studied at home, and we started learning English at home because my father could speak English.
Would you be in the house for literally days and weeks at a time?
Yes. Days, weeks, months. Time passes. And you only go outside if you really need something. Otherwise, you just stay at home. But we had cousins, so sometimes my cousin would come and we would just entertain each other with reading books. Because since my cousins and my sister are older than me, so they had every year's books for the schooling. I was in the 5th class, and they already had the books for the 5th class. So they will just practice with me and sit an exam for me. And same thing will happen to my other brothers and sisters. And we would rent Indian movies from those guys that we knew that they had a video shop in the past. And we would watch them in the basement. But then we would hide it and we will give to neighbors and neighbors will give to neighbors. The whole Kabul would have seen the same movie.
Women and girls had to be completely covered from head to foot in a burqa when they left the house. And even then, they weren't supposed to leave home unless they were with a male relative.
Once it was an emergency that I went to a doctor. I was with my father, but the doctor, since he was a man, I was not allowed to be seen by that doctor, so I didn't get the proper treatment in there.
So how were you cured? How did you get any help?
My father or cousin or uncle would see a male doctor and describe what's my illness, and then that doctor will prescribe medicine and then we will get it over the counter.
Did you have any shopping trips at all?
Yes, once I went with my mom. I don't exactly remember what I wanted to buy. Or maybe I was just tired of sitting at home, so I just thought, well, let's have the burqa on and go outside the house. My mother is very protective of me, and my mother told me, make sure you don't show your hands. I didn't have nail polishes. I wore like a thick socks and shoes. So we went to this shopping place, and it smelled a bit bad, and with the burqa, it's quite hard to breathe. I took my burqa off, like I wanted to just breathe normally. And I didn't notice that behind me there is a Talib. He had the intention to beat me with the whip. And as soon as he tried to raise his hand, my mom saw and my mom pulled my burqa down. And then my mom told him, I'm sorry, she didn't see you. But maybe he was one of the good Talib. He didn't beat me. He just left me and he just warned me, make sure you cover your face. And I said, I apologize. I will never show my face again. Just don't beat me.
By 2001, the Taliban controlled around 90% of Afghanistan. They were accused of giving refuge to the al-Qaeda leader, Osama bin Laden. And after the 9/11 attacks on the USA in September 2001, America and its allies invaded, driving the Taliban out of Kabul. The last US troops are due to leave the country by September 2021, 20 years after they first arrived. That's it from this edition of Witness History with me, Kirsty Reid. If you'd like to listen to more of our first-hand accounts of the past, we've got a huge archive online. Just search for BBC Witness History.
It might only be midsummer, but fall will be here before you know it. And with it, the start of a new school year. Don't worry, Macy's has your back. First day outfits, backpacks, lunchboxes. Macy's has everything you need, even that must-have coffee maker for those heading off to college. And have you seen all their bedding options? Shop now at Macys.com/back-to-school.